Hello, I'm Shoestring Jane. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would talk about food waste and using up leftovers, especially as food is now becoming so expensive and it could be becoming more scarce. You know, people are already saying that some of the shelves in the supermarkets are sometimes empty and they can't always get what they want. So all the more reason not to waste it. I've been trying not to waste it since I took part in Zero Waste Week for the first time 2 or 3 years ago now, because it made me hyper aware really of what we were throwing away. I tend to think we don't throw a lot away, but there were things like bags of salad that I wasn't planning into meals, and then I think I would have them for lunches, and then we'll end up not being around for lunches or eating something else. And you know, sometimes if I've got the last bit of a bag of salad now, I'll sling them in at whatever I'm cooking, because actually it's just vegetables and they kind of tend to disappear in there. But sometimes they've just gone slimy in the bottom of the fridge and they get thrown away. And this is really, really common. We don't waste bread anymore because we don't actually eat tons of bread. But what we tend to do, particularly in the summer with a sliced loaf, is that we keep it in the freezer, because then you could just take out the bread that you need, that you're going to use that day. And even if you do that at the last minute, you can either toast it, or you can, what we tend to do is just leave it on the breadboard for 10 minutes and then it's defrosted, particularly again in the summer, as I say. So things like that we've kind of addressed. And I think that more and more people, now that food is becoming more expensive, are going to start addressing their food waste, which is good for the environment, because the food we chuck away ends up releasing lots of carbon emissions in landfill, and that's not good for the environment. So there's another reason not to do it. There's so many reasons not to do it. Things like anything raw goes on our compost. So if we've got potato peelings and that kind of thing, you can't do very much with. They will go on the compost heap. Tea leaves, loose tea leaves. We do use tea bags as well. I use the biodegradable ones now from PG Tips most of the time, but if they're tea bags that aren't biodegradable, they'll go in the normal food waste. I have a friend who actually empties hers out into her compost, and then throws a little, it looks like paper but it contains plastic, surround away. So that's something you could do as well. So, you know, nobody's perfect. With the best will in the world, sometimes there is something hidden at the back of the fridge that you have forgotten about. And you know, if you're very aware of what's in your fridge and in your cupboards, and you do regular stock takes, regular pantry clear outs, regular audits of what's in your freezer, then you'll be aware of what's there and you'll waste a lot less and you won't have the leftovers. But if you do have leftovers, then what to do with them? So I was having a little think about this. Sorry, I've got a cat that's really distracting me. She keeps coming up and poking me with wanting to be stroked. So I'm thinking about things that you can do. So I've started making some bread pudding. I make bread pudding very regularly. Justin absolutely loves it. He loves anything with custard, and that goes really well with custard. I usually make a crank spread pudding, and I will try and remember to link to the video I did of that below. But this time, somebody on my Facebook group, My Second Hand and Frugal Life, made a kind of chocolate bread pudding. It was an Italian recipe. So I've given that a go. It's actually cooking now. So if the timer goes off, that's why I'll be going to go and see what's happening with that. So I thought I'd just do something different. But there's lots of things you can make with bread. I mean, I usually grate some up and have a bag of breadcrumbs, but I don't use those very often. If you make a lot of things like nut roast, breadcrumbs are really useful though. So if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, it's really, really worth saving your bread ends and keeping them frozen for when you need them. What else have I made? Something called Apple Brown Betty, which is good if you've got apples as well. And it's kind of got a crumbly bread topping, and it's really, really nice. So potatoes, if you keep them in the fridge in the summer, they won't sprout. That's what I tend to do. They should be in a cool, dark place anyway, but if you keep them in the fridge in the summer particularly, that will stop them sprouting. So if I find I've got little green bits or sprouty bits, as long as they're not too sprouty on my potatoes, I will just cut them off and use them. I know that some people actually use potatoes they bought from the supermarket to grow more potatoes in the gardens. That's another thing you can do if they do sprout. But leftover mashed potatoes, so that's a really good one, isn't it? So it's sometimes you don't eat as much as you make. But leftover mash is really easy to use. I usually freeze it. I do regular soup making sessions, and it's so nice to have leftover potato to thicken your soup. It really makes a good thickener. Same with stews. You know, if it's looking a bit thin and it wants a bit of substance, then you can shove a bit of leftover mash in that. And then you can mix it up with vegetables and make patties, and Bubbler Squeak's the obvious one. Or we used to do at home when we were kids, it was a real treat to do fried potatoes. And they could be either sliced potatoes or mashed potatoes. And you just fry them, have them with an egg, and they're really delicious. Uneaten vegetables other than mash or potatoes are good in soups. Again, I tend to keep an old, like an ice cream tub or a big butter or margarine tub in the freezer. And as I get leftover bits of, it might just be a tiny bit of vegetables, not really enough to actually put towards another meal, but just enough not to want to throw them away and to keep it for something. It's very good for soup. And sometimes I'll just do a whole batch of what I call my leftover soup, and I'll sling all my potato. I'll put like an onion and some celery and carrots and stuff in as a base, fry it all up, and then chuck all the leftover frozen veg that I've been accumulating in with some stock. And it makes a really good soup. You never quite know what you're going to get, but it does make a nice soup. Cup of tea in my nice new mug that I got from the charity shop. So you can use some of them up in like a pasta sauce as well. That could be quite good. Depends what the veg is. I wouldn't put sprouts in a pasta sauce, clearly. But things like peas and chopped up carrots and that kind of thing, that gets lost in a pasta bake or a pasta sauce. You can put them into an omelette, make a kind of Spanish omelette, again with your potatoes sliced up. You can do that, or a frittata, something like that. What else can you do with vegetables? So you could actually make a cheese sauce, smother your leftover vegetables in cheese sauce and make a kind of like a cauliflower cheese, but with any other veg you happen to have lying around. That's really nice. Have you ever bought a load of herbs, meaning to use all of them, but only using a few of them in a particular recipe, fresh herbs, I mean, and then they sit in the bottom of the fridge and they go a bit manky and you end up throwing them away? So I've done that in the past. What I find with fresh herbs, particularly leafy herbs like coriander and parsley, is that they're really lovely in salads. You chop them up with some lettuce or just with some grated carrot, and you can have quite a lot more herbs than you think. They don't have to be a kind of seasoning. They can actually be a vegetable. So they're really nice in that. And I also like a cheese and herb omelette. So I'd chop up things like that and put them in there. Not so much woody herbs, so things like thyme and sage. I'm not so good for that. But, you know, things like that you can chop up, you can stick them in ice cubes in the freezer and then just stick them in your stews and add that nice sort of woody note. You can do that with any herbs, can't you, anyway, really? So there's no reason to chuck them away. You could freeze them. You can actually freeze them as they are as well. I've had frozen like stems of thyme and just frozen them, and they've been absolutely perfect. So that's something else you can do. Use your freezer. It's always really good for preserving anything like that you don't want to waste. If you ever make a really proper good gravy when you've made a roast, then you know it's just too good to throw away. I would never throw away leftover gravy like that. Instant gravy is another matter. It's just not that great. So I just try and make what we need and what we're going to eat. But proper gravy, it can be frozen and used as a base for a soup, for a stew or sauces, whatever really. And actually, my brother-in-law will just eat a plate of gravy and mop it up with some bread. He really loves that. He always asks for a slice of bread at the end of any kind of dinner that's had gravy on it anyway. So you'd never have any leftover gravy with him because you just sling it on his plate and he'll scoff the lot with some bread. Fills you up, so why not? Rice is another thing we frequently misjudge and end up with lots of leftovers of. And I would say to avoid that, then measure out your rice. I think 2 to 3 ounces per person is enough, really, probably more than enough. I say 2 ounces per person is normally enough in this house. But if you do end up with leftover rice, of course you can do a kind of egg fried rice with some vegetables. You can use your leftover veggies there as well. Or you can chuck it in soup again, like a minestrone. A minestrone usually has pasta, but why not use rice? You do have to be really, really careful though with rice. I should say that if you cook it and you've got leftover rice, then freeze it straight away. Cool it quickly and freeze it straight away because you don't want it hanging about, and you want to make sure it's really, really hot before you reheat it, and only reheat it once. So what else can you do with it? You can kind of make a sort of risotto or a kind of rice bake, adding vegetables and maybe a bit of tomato sauce, put some cheese on top, stick it under the grill. That's really nice. Or you can make cheesy rice balls, particularly if you've got something like mozzarella that's quite nice mixed with leftover rice and an egg, and you can fry them or bake them, and they're actually really, really nice. A bit of garlic as well in there is good. Or you can make a rice salad is the other thing. So you can have a look and see if you've got any ingredients that would be good in a salad. You can have things like sweet corn, chopped up onion, raisins, peppers, anything like that really. So you can make a rice salad with your leftover rice. As part of this video, I will be showing you a banana loaf that I make on a regular basis. So what I tend to do is, if we buy too many bananas, and in the summer particularly, I try to only buy 3 or 4 at a time because they ripen so quickly and they end up just overripe in the fruit bowl. Nobody wants them. But if you do have leftover bananas that you can't use straight away, they are fine to freeze. They do go a bit black, but then they go really squidgy, and they taste just the same, just nice and banana-y. So I use those. I've got 3 frozen bananas that I'm going to use in my banana loaf, but also they're fine in smoothies. That's absolutely fine. And frozen banana, if you mix it with a little bit of chocolate, it makes a kind of vegan ice cream, so that's something worth considering as well. So there's no reason really to waste bananas just because you've bought too many and they've gone overripe, because you can freeze them and then use them later. Bananas can also be squished up with any other soft fruit that you've got and made into homemade ice lollies. You can put them in lolly moulds, mix them with perhaps a little bit of milk or yogurt or juice, and they're really nice. Other soft fruit can be treated the same way really, shoved into smoothies, frozen until you're ready to use it. I tend to buy with soft fruit, particularly in the summer. I do quite often will buy the frozen stuff, and anything that I manage to forage, like blackberries, that ends up in the freezer because it doesn't keep for very long at all. And you'll find with strawberries and raspberries, you buy them in the summer and you have to really eat them straight away. So plan them to eat them immediately, or freeze them, stick them in your smoothies, or stick them in smoothies straight away the next day. Apples don't really do well in smoothies, but if I've got apples that are sitting around looking a bit wrinkly, which does happen because we've both gone off apples actually, eating apples, but I tend to chop them up really small into cubes, and when I do my rice in the microwave, my porridge in the microwave, I just put the little cubes of apple in them, and that cooks at the same time, and that's quite nice. And especially if you then put some raisins on top, you don't need any kind of other sweetener. So that's quite good. You can dry them in rings and make apple rings in the oven on a very, very low heat. However, do you want your oven on for hours at a time at this point when their energy bills are so high? Even though you can have it on very low, you can't really cook them with anything else because it's too low. So I probably wouldn't do that at the moment. But apples, if we find we've got them and they've gone a bit wrinkly, we'll just stew them up. Stew them up with raisins again, a bit of cinnamon, and have them with custard because, as I say, Justin, aka Mr. Shoestring, will eat anything with custard. So we never have anything like, we never throw apples away because you just don't need to. If I can't use them, I use them in cooking if I can't eat them straight away as well. They don't have to be cooking apples, do they, when you cook with them? So it could be an apple crumble or an apple cake, or whatever you care to make with them, but there's no reason really to waste them. And another thing habit you could get into if you really don't like wasting food would be to make your own stock. So you may have seen in one of my recent videos, I've made chicken stock out of poultry carcasses that we've taken the meat off and we've just got the carcasses. I tend to freeze them until I've got a couple, and then I'll make them. It's really good if you can get them in your slow cooker because, of course, that doesn't use very much energy at all. I get a big bag of bones as well from the butcher and do the same thing, but you could do that with the bones from a roast. So it doesn't have to be chicken. It could be beef or pork or whatever bone you've got. Just keep them and use them to make a lovely bone broth. If you are a vegetarian or vegan, you can also make a veggie stock. And I've got a recipe for poultry stock and for a veggie stock on my blog, www.shoestringcottage.com. It's very easy to make. Basically, you want a margarine container again. They do come in handy for so many things, don't they? Or an old plastic takeaway carton. And you collect all of your peelings. Give everything a good wash first. I don't use potato peelings in this, but things like carrots, ends of broccoli, the thick stems of cabbage, anything that you don't want to use. Not onion peel either, because that's too bitter, but any bits of onion that you think are just not, they're a bit tough. Sometimes the outer edges of red onions can be a bit tough. Put them all in your container, and then when you've got enough, you can make a veggie stock. And both these stocks, veggie or poultry or beefy or whatever you're making, they make such a nice basis, a foundation for so many other dishes. They add a real depth of flavour that is really hard to get in commercial stock cubes. So it's really, really worth considering making your own stock. So those are just a few ideas for using up leftovers and reducing your food waste. In the end, though, if you plan really carefully, so if you plan your meals, plan who's going to be in, how much of whatever you're going to need for each week, and then shop smartly. So you shop with a list, you only buy what you need, you don't over purchase things, and you plan in your leftovers ideally. So you could say, well, we don't need a lot of lunches because we're bound to have some leftover, I don't know, spaghetti bolognese or whatever it is you've got. But if you plan everything in, then you won't really have any food waste, and that will reduce the cost of your food bill as well. So it's really, really worth doing. So meal plan, write a list, stick to your list and factor in leftovers. And then, none of us are perfect. The best will in the world, you will sometimes find you have too much of something. So just be aware. You can Google, if you can't think of anything to do with a particular ingredient, you can Google it, you'll come up with lots of ideas. If you go onto my Facebook group, you'll find people are often saying, oh, I've got 3 manky looking lemons, what can I do with them? And those kind of things. Come and ask a question. People will give you ideas. There's all sorts of creative, clever people out there who will tell you what you can do with your leftovers rather than bin them. So what do you do with your leftovers? Do you have a particular recipe that you like? Please do share in the comments below so that we can all have a go. And I will show you as well after this video how my bread pudding and my banana cake turned out. So these are a couple of things that we often have left over. I think these are quite old, these bananas. They've been in the freezer for a while, so they do need using. I think I bought too many and it was warm and they all became ripe at the same time. So I stuck a few in the freezer because I knew I could make a banana bread with them. And these are just bread ends, various types of bread. I don't like to throw the bread ends away really, because I know that we both enjoy a bread pudding. I make breadcrumbs with them. There's various other desserts you can make with bread, like apple brown Betty I've made, which was rather nice, I remember. But this time, a member of my Facebook group had made some chocolate bread pudding. So because I've got a lot of cocoa powder that I discovered when I did a proper pantry clear out, I'm going to use some of that up in this. It just needs some sugar, a tiny bit of icing, sugar at the end, some sugar. Maybe some dried fruit. I'll see what this recipe looks like when I start getting it made. I didn't have a lot of milk, so I've actually used milk powder to make the milk because the recipe is asking for 1 litre of milk, which seems like a lot to me. And I didn't want to use all my milk up, so that's what I'm going to try. I'm going to do that first, and I'll do the banana bread. So onwards and upwards. I'm just pulling the bread apart. It is actually quite stale. It's been in the freezer, but it still kind of gets a bit dry if you leave it there too long. And this one is so tough, I'm going to have to actually soak it first and then break it up, I think. I think it's a bit of sourdough, so I don't know what that's going to be like in it. So anyway, you need to soak it in the milk. So let's do that. This to me seems like too much milk for a recipe. It just seems like too much. I'm not going to put it all in yet. I think I'm going to put about half of it in and then see how it goes. It just seems like too much milk to me. Let's put that one in there. Leave it to soak. Perhaps a little more. Yeah, I think it's going to be too much. So let's try that, see how it works. Okay, so I thought it was too much milk. I still think it's too much milk. I've left it all to soak while I've been taking the dog out, so that's been actually soaking for about 45 minutes and it still hasn't absorbed all of the milk, so I'm not going to put the rest in. I've got about half a pint of milk left. Maybe I'll regret that, we'll see, but it says leave until all the milk has been absorbed by the bread, and I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm now going to add more liquid to it. This is 2 eggs. Oh, there was, by the way, 350 grams of stale bread or bread crusts, bread ends in my case, which is about 12 ounces. 2 eggs. I'm going to put in 120 grams of sugar in a moment, just using ordinary caster sugar. If I can get it open, that is, just using ordinary caster sugar. So let's put that in. 120 grams is about 4 ounces, should have said. Chucking that in. I've decided to add about 4 ounces of raisins as well, just because I feel like it needs it. Needs some colour in it. So it's a real good sloppy mess, isn't it? And then I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder. I'm not sifting it or anything, I should just mix it well. Yeah, I discovered I had 3 lots of cocoa powder when I did my pantry clear out recently, so it just shows you have to keep on top of these things, don't you? So I'm the worst for that. And that's all of the main ingredients. So the only other ingredient is icing sugar to dust at the end, if you want to. So I'm not really sure I do, but I've got some out anyway, just in case. So I've never made chocolate bread pudding before. I have made a chocolate bread and butter pudding, which was extremely indulgent and delicious. It was a Delia Smith recipe. So if you fancy something like that, but for a dinner party or a special occasion, it had loads of quite expensive ingredients in it. I think I did it for an anniversary party. It was really nice, but I don't. It's not really every day, to be fair. There you go. So it's kind of mixed in nicely. I think that'll be okay. It really doesn't need any more of the milk. It makes a difference using powdered milk. I don't really use powdered milk usually because I tend to have lactose free, and I've never seen lactose free powdered milk, but I've got some for my stores and it's actually going to be quite useful. So here we go. This is the right size tin. Squidge it all in. The baking time is about 50 minutes, but again, it will depend on your oven, won't it? 50 minutes at 180 centigrade or 350 Fahrenheit, the recipe says. I will link the recipe below. Depending on how it comes out, you may or may not decide you want to give it a try. My bananas are still defrosting, so I'm going to do something with those later, possibly even tomorrow. So, okay, I'm going to put that in the oven and leave that for about 50 minutes, then I'll check it and see how it's getting on. So here's the bread pudding fresh out of the oven. It's quite soft, so I'm glad I didn't put all of the milk in there because I think it would have been too soft. So I'm going to leave it to cool. We're going to see my parents for fish and chips, so perhaps we'll have a piece of that when we get back later. Okay, so it's cooled now. It looks like this. So I'm going to taste it, see what it tastes like. Moment of truth. It tastes exactly like what it is. Chocolate bread pudding. It's quite nice. It tastes like, you know, shades of bread with chocolate spread on it. I'm glad I put the currants in it, the raisins though. I kind of think it needs those to stop it being too cloying. I think that'll be good with custard. This shoestring will like that. Okay, so moving on to the banana loaf. The recipe I use is from Delia Smith's Complete Cookery Course. It's a very old book, but you can still get this banana recipe, you can see it's well used, online on her website, Delia Smith's website, which is actually very, very good. So I've just put in caster sugar, beaten egg, well, not a beaten egg, actually just a slightly cracked egg, some softened margarine. You can use softened butter, but I've got margarine. I'm going to put in some plain flour. I'll put the actual recipe link so you can see the quantities in the description. I want 2 tablespoons of baking powder. And then I'm going to whisk that all together. Okay, so it looks a bit dry at this point, but that's normal, and the bananas will add a lot of moisture, particularly these ones, because they've been in the freezer. If you're not using squidgy frozen ones at this point, you would want to take them out of the skins and mash them up, but I'm just going to take them out and put them in. So here we go. It's hard to explain to you quite how disgusting these feel, but you see, although they've gone very black on the outside, they're really not that black on the inside. They do kind of feel like squidgy dead things though, in some respects. The recipe really calls for 4. I've only got 3, but I'm not waiting for a 4th. These will do. They're not the tiniest of bananas. So, yeah, there you go. So my bananas, let's break those up a bit. So you can see it's suddenly got a lot moister, and now I want to put the grated rind of 1 lemon and 1 orange in. I'll use the lemon and the orange for something else, and if I don't use them soon, I will chop them up and freeze them. And the last thing I've got to do is chop up a few walnuts. Okay, so I've added my peels, and I've just hand chopped these walnuts, and they can go in. And somehow along the way I acquired these liners for loaf tins and cake tins. I didn't buy them. I'm sure my daughters must have bought them, so I'm using them. And this recipe is really, it lends itself to just using what you have. So I didn't have chopped walnuts, I have whole walnuts, I've chopped them. Sometimes I haven't had oranges, sometimes I haven't had walnuts at all, and I've just varied the ingredients a little bit, and it's worth experimenting. So I've got the basic banana mix. I have used mixed dried fruit instead of the peel. I've chopped up other nuts as well. I've had like chopped mixed nuts and chucked those in as well. It's best with the walnuts, I have to say. I prefer it with the walnuts, but the mixed fruit with peel and stuff like that in it worked really well. So I'm going to give it one final mix, and then I'll put it in the loaf tin. And obviously we don't have smelly vision, but if we did, you would be able to smell the really lovely banana, fruity, citrusy smells going on right now. I think this is the best version that I have made, which is the original Delia Smith one with the peel and everything. But it really is, you know, frugal cooking is not about rushing to the shop to buy things you don't have. It's about trying to use up what you've got already. And we're trying not to waste the bananas. That's the whole point of the recipe. So to keep the costs down, just use what you have and adapt. I don't want to waste this bit, but it's hard to get it out. So there you go. I'm going to stick this in here. I have to say, these are really handy. They're much easier than dealing with cutting greaseproof paper to size, these liners, so I'm quite a fan of them now. And then this will go into an oven, quite a low oven, 180 degrees, 350 Fahrenheit, gas mark 4. And that goes in the oven for about 50 to 55 minutes, maybe an hour, depends on your oven, but you know, keep an eye on it. You don't want to overcook it, make it go dry. And it's so nice, used like bread really. It's so lovely to have it sliced with some butter. So, there you go, it's ready to go in. Here we have it. It's got a bit of give, but it's got no squishiness in the middle. So that's all ready. So I'm going to leave it to cool, and we'll have a piece with a cup of tea, but not yet. Leave it to cool first. This is what the banana bread looks like inside. You can see the lemon and orange and all the nuttiness. So we're going to have a piece each with some butter on. So we've used up some bananas, we've used up some bread. I have to say that favourite is always Delia Smith's banana loaf. It's such a good way to use up old bananas and brown bananas. The browner the better and squidgier the better. But the chocolate bread pudding, well, chocolate bread cake I think is actually called, was okay. We'll definitely eat it all, but it was not as good as bread pudding. Like the Crank's bread pudding that I usually make was far superior. I don't know if it's because it had no fat in it, and that's kind of butter that I use in the Crank's recipe adds a real kind of nice depth of flavour, or if it didn't have enough chocolate in it. So I think if you're going to make something chocolate, it probably needs more than 3 ounces of cocoa powder to be really chocolatey. I think if I made something like that again, I would actually chop up some dark chocolate and stick that in it, or add some kind of like something really chocolatey, some big chunks of chocolate maybe, to give it a really good chocolatey flavour, because otherwise it was just mildly cocoa based really. So it was very slightly disappointing, but okay with custard. So we have to experiment, don't we? And that's what's good about trying out different recipes that you find on the internet. Have an experiment, you will find some favourites, and you'll find some that you'll come back to again and again. So that's it for today. If you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm apparently, and it presents my videos to more people if more of you have liked it and commented on it. And if you've sat through the adverts, thank you very much for that, because that is the only way that people get paid for making these videos on YouTube. So if you skip straight through them, we don't get paid anything at all. And don't forget to subscribe as well, and then you will know next time I produce a video. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.